What if I told you that the very thing she hoped would keep you down is the key to making her regret ever walking away? She thought you'd stay broken. She thought her absence would crush you, keep you stuck in the past. But she didn't expect you to rise from the ashes, stronger, unshakable, and completely out of her reach. Right now, you're at a crossroads. You can stay trapped in the pain, letting it define you, or you can turn it into the weapon that changes everything. Pain doesn't have to be your weakness. It can be your greatest strength if you know how to use it. If you're ready to stop letting the past control you and start rebuilding yourself into someone untouchable, hit the like button, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below, "I control my destiny, not my past." Let's dive in. Number 1. Why she needs you to stay emotionally weak. Most men believe love is built on loyalty, vulnerability, and emotional openness, and while those things have a place, they often fail to realize that, for many women, love isn't about emotion, it's about control. Especially in the early stages, she's not just observing how much you care, she's testing how much power she can have over you. The compliments, the affection, even the intimacy are real, but they're also part of a quiet psychological calibration. Can I lead him, or will he lead himself? You don't notice it at first. She pulls back slightly to see if you chase. She changes her tone, ignores a message, and flirts with uncertainty. These aren't always conscious acts of manipulation, but they are tests. And when you fail, by panicking, over-explaining, or letting her dictate your mood, you send a loud signal: you can break me. That's when everything begins to shift. She doesn't lose interest because you care, she loses interest because you made her your center. You placed her at the top of your emotional hierarchy. You made her your purpose instead of your partner. And when that happens, the balance breaks. She no longer sees you as the man who leads, she sees you as the man who follows her emotional lead, and once that respect is lost, so is her attraction. This is the harsh truth many men don't want to accept. She doesn't want to break you, but if she can, she will. Because biologically and psychologically, women are drawn to strength, not just physical but emotional. If you crumble when she tests you, if you make her the judge of your worth, she may comfort you at the moment, but in her mind the decision is already made. The man she once admired is now dependent, and dependency kills desire. But this is also your opportunity. When you recognize this dynamic, you can begin to reverse it. Not by playing mind games, not by pretending to be cold, but by truly stepping back and reclaiming control of your emotions. By not reacting, by not chasing, by realizing that her affection shouldn't define your confidence. Your silence becomes strength. Your discipline becomes desire. When you refuse to be shaken, you become something rare. A man who doesn't need her approval to feel like a man. The Stoics teach that nothing outside of ourselves should have dominion over our inner peace. Not fortune, not failure, and certainly not a woman's shifting moods. Your strength doesn't come from suppressing your feelings. It comes from owning them without making them someone else's responsibility. You become the mountain, not the leaf in the wind. And when she realizes she can't move you with silence, distance, and games, the dynamic shifts back. But by then, you won't care whether it does, because you'll no longer need her to validate the power you've already claimed. Now, speak out and comment below. I control my mind, no one else does. Number 2. The exact moment she knows she can break you. There is always a moment. It's not dramatic or loud, it's quiet, almost invisible. But for her, it's clear as day. That one instant when she realizes you're no longer in control. Maybe it's when you apologize too quickly for something you didn't even do. Maybe it's when you send 5 texts in a row because she went cold for a day. Maybe it's when she pulls back slightly and you spiral over-explaining, overreaching, and over-feeling. That's when it happens. She sees that you're breakable. Once she knows that everything has changed, Women are intuitive. They can sense emotional imbalance like blood in the water. When your sense of self becomes entangled with her responses, you give her full control. She no longer needs to wonder how you feel. It's written on your face, words and energy. You've placed her on a pedestal and made yourself small. And while she may not reject you immediately, the damage is already done. She loses the respect that attraction requires to survive. This isn't about playing games or being emotionally cold. It's about understanding that desperation is repellent. When you show her that her affection defines your self-worth, you stop being her equal. You become emotionally dependent. And no matter how much she once liked you, no woman stays attracted to a man who makes her the source of his stability. Think back. You probably thought you were just being honest, emotionally available, and fighting for love, but what you were really doing was revealing fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, and fear is never attractive. The Stoics understood this clearly. He who is ruled by emotion is a slave to circumstance, and a man ruled by a woman's approval can never lead himself, let alone lead a relationship. This is where your power returns. Not in trying to undo the moment, but in recognizing it. The moment she saw your weakness doesn't have to define you. It can become the pivot point where you stop reacting and start rebuilding. You don't need to convince her of your worth. You need to convince yourself that her opinion no longer matters. From that moment, you stop chasing, explaining, and trying to be understood. You go silent. You step back. You train. You rebuild. Not for her, for you. Because the man who survives heartbreak without bitterness becomes something rare, something she didn't expect. A man who can't be broken twice. A man who doesn't need to be forgiven for feeling whole. A man whose value exists whether she sees it or not. So let that moment stand. Let her remember the breakable version of you, because the next time she sees you, she won't recognize who you've become. Now, speak out and comment below. That moment broke me, but it also rebuilt me stronger. Number 3, when you decide enough is enough. There comes a point when the pain no longer makes you desperate. It makes you decisive. When her silence stops breaking you and starts building something deeper. When every unanswered message, every ignored glance, every ounce of emotional withdrawal ceases to feel like abandonment and instead becomes your wake-up call, that's the turning point. The moment you say, enough. Until now, you've probably poured your energy into making her see your worth. You might have reshaped yourself to be likable, attentive, and accommodating. You convinced yourself that if you just showed her how much you care, if you could prove you're good enough, she'd return. But deep down, you knew it wasn't working. You felt it every time she pulled further away, and with every effort you made to bring her closer, you became smaller in your own eyes. You surrendered your self-respect to the illusion of love. But then something shifts. A voice inside you that was once quiet becomes impossible to ignore. It doesn't scream, it speaks calmly, firmly. You've given enough. It's time to take everything back. This moment isn't born from anger or revenge, but from clarity. The Stoics speak of the kind of clarity they speak of when they say that suffering isn't caused by the events themselves, but by our judgments of them. You finally stop judging her actions as a reflection of your worth. You stop hoping she'll come back to rescue your self-esteem. Instead, you turn inward. You stop chasing her and start chasing the man you were meant to become. That's when you begin the most powerful transformation of all, the shift from seeking external validation to reclaiming internal power. You realize you have two choices: continue living in the emotional echo of someone who left, or rise so high that her absence no longer echoes at all. And with that decision, you begin to evolve. You hit the gym, not to glow up for her, but because your body deserves strength. You become disciplined in your work, not to prove anything to anyone, but because excellence is your standard now. You stop reaching out, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you have nothing left to say. And in that space, in that silence, she loses the version of you that was once available, predictable, and emotionally dependent. She might notice, she might wonder, she might even come back, but by then, it won't matter, because the man she once knew is gone. And the man you've become, he doesn't need her recognition. His peace is not tied to her presence. He's not hoping for a message. He's building a life where her message arrives too late, if it ever comes. This is your rebirth, forged not in revenge, but in resolve. Now, speak out and comment below. Enough was the beginning of everything. Number 4. Killing off the weak version of yourself. At some point in this journey, you'll have to make a brutal but necessary decision. Not about her, not about the relationship, but about the version of yourself that let it all happen. The one who waited by the phone, the one who apologized just to keep the peace, the one who made her his center of gravity. That version of you, the one who compromised his self-worth for closeness, must die. This is the part no one talks about, the part where your healing isn't romantic or inspirational. It's ruthless. It's long nights with no one to text. It's pushing yourself at the gym until your body shakes. It's staring down your flaws without flinching. Because to kill the weaker version of you, you have to be willing to suffer. And not just suffer, you have to be willing to suffer alone. Most men fear solitude because it forces them to confront what they've avoided. But the Stoics embraced it. They believed isolation wasn't weakness. It was the forge where strength is built. It's where you learn to move through pain without distraction, to sit in silence and hear the truth, to suffer not for pity but for power. And when you stop running from that space, you stop being the man who breaks under pressure. You become the man who's shaped by it. Pain becomes your mentor. Every ounce of heartbreak becomes a lesson in self-control. Every moment of silence becomes a training ground for discipline. Every pang of regret becomes a spark of purpose. You no longer react, you no longer chase, you no longer beg. Instead, you build. You rebuild your body, mind, and mission layer by layer with no audience, no applause, and no guarantee of recognition. But here's the thing. Something else is born when that weaker version of you dies. A man who isn't moved by mood swings. A man who doesn't seek permission to feel confident. A man who doesn't need someone to stay to feel worthy. This man doesn't posture or pretend. He simply is. And she might come back. She might show up just when your life is full again. But she won't be meeting the man she left behind. She'll meet the version of you she never expected to face. The one she can't manipulate, control, or define. And that man? He doesn't need closure. He doesn't need validation. He doesn't even need to respond. Because he understands that the ultimate transformation wasn't about her. It was about burning off the boy she could break and emerging as a man she'll never reach again. Now, speak out and comment below. I buried who I was to become who I needed to be. Number 5. The discipline of silence and the shift in power. At first, silence feels like surrender. You're used to responding, explaining, and reaching out whenever things go wrong. It feels natural to try to fix what's broken with words. But when words no longer carry weight, when your voice becomes background noise in her world, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. That's where silence comes in. Not as avoidance, but as transformation. It's the shift from powerlessness to sovereignty. When you go silent, she notices. Not immediately, but eventually. She feels the space you once filled. She checks her phone and doesn't see your name. She posts and gets no reaction. She reaches out to test the waters and finds them still. This is no contact done right. Not as a manipulation, not as a countdown until she returns, but as a declaration, I don't need to be heard to be in control. Silence becomes your boundary. It says, I will not beg, I will not chase, I will not shrink to fit your comfort. And with each day that passes without a response, without a slip, you prove to her, and more importantly to yourself, that you've changed the rules of engagement. You've removed yourself from the emotional chess game. And she can't win a game you're no longer playing. This reversal unsettles her. She expected you to break. She expected you to fold under pressure, but instead you vanish. Not into bitterness, but into discipline. And that's what makes your silence so loud. It's not the absence of emotion, it's the presence of control. From a Stoic perspective, silence is a form of self-mastery. It's the refusal to be reactive, the choice to endure discomfort without external validation. You aren't silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because you no longer owe your energy to someone who didn't value it when it was freely given. And the psychological impact is profound. She begins to question herself. Why isn't he reaching out? Has he moved on? Did he stop caring? Or worse, did he become better without me? Her control begins to unravel, not because you retaliated, but because you outgrew the need to respond. The longer your silence stretches, the stronger you become. You stop obsessing over her return and start obsessing over your next move. The gym becomes your temple, your work becomes your mission, your solitude becomes your sanctuary. You realize that what you thought was loneliness was really space, space to rebuild, to reflect, to rise. And if she ever reaches back out, your silence has already done its job. She's no longer the one who decides what happens next. You are. Not with words, not with pleading, but with calm, measured indifference. Because now, you speak through action, through absence. Now speak out and comment below. My silence is strength. It speaks louder than need. Number 6. Reborn through control. Becoming untouchable. At some point along the path, something inside you clicks. You stop checking her social media. You stop rehearsing imaginary conversations in your head. You stop waiting for closure. What once felt like unbearable pain becomes manageable, quiet, and finally, irrelevant. And in that silence, you don't just heal. You're reborn, not as a man who's trying to prove something, but as a man who no longer needs to. You become untouchable, not because you're hard, but because you're whole. This version of you doesn't flinch at a distance. He doesn't lose sleep over mixed signals. He doesn't crumble when he isn't chosen, because now he chooses himself. He's grounded, focused, and emotionally self-sufficient. The things that used to rattle him, the delay in a text, the lack of a compliment, the idea of being replaced, lose their power, because this man knows that nothing truly valuable can be taken from someone who doesn't give his worth away. You don't pretend to be strong anymore. You are strong. You don't fake indifference. You feel peace. Your days are no longer shaped by whether she notices or regrets. Your purpose, your routines, and your progress shape them. And this kind of transformation doesn't need to be flaunted. In fact, it rarely is. Because true power moves in silence, and the man who has mastered himself no longer needs the world's validation to feel complete. Stoicism teaches that the highest power is not control over others, it's control over self. And now you've reached a place where you don't need to respond to disrespect. You don't need to correct the narrative. You don't need to be understood. You just live, and you live well. That's what stings her the most. Not your anger, not your revenge, but your complete detachment from needing her at all. This isn't about being emotionless. It's about emotional command. You still feel, but your feelings no longer control you. You still remember, but those memories no longer weaken you. And maybe she will come back. Maybe she watches you quietly, wondering what changed. But by then, it doesn't matter. Because the man she knew is gone. And the man you are now, he doesn't look back. And here's the truth. That final version of you, the untouchable one, that's who you were meant to be all along. She didn't break you. She revealed where the cracks were. And instead of patching them, you rebuilt yourself from the foundation. You are no longer the man who can be shaken, broken, or bent. You are unmoved, unbothered, unreachable, except by those who've earned access. Now, speak out and comment below. I am reborn, untouchable, not because I'm cold, but because I'm complete. Number 7. When she realizes you're gone, but it's too late. There's a moment she never expected. It doesn't come with fanfare or a dramatic gesture. It's quiet, subtle, but unmistakably real. It's the moment she realizes you're not just distant, you're gone. Not physically, not just emotionally, but energetically. You've moved past her orbit, and she feels it. At first, your silence confused her. She assumed it was temporary, a phase, a strategy. But time went on, and still, nothing. You didn't break. You didn't reach out. You didn't chase. And in your absence, her certainty started to unravel. She checked your profile, hoping for signs of weakness. She asked mutual friends, maybe even tested you with a subtle message. But what came back wasn't bitterness or desperation. It was nothing. And that nothing began to echo louder than any words ever could. This is when the power shifts entirely, because while she might have walked away confidently, she now questions everything. Did I misjudge him? Did I mistake his quiet for weakness? And then it hits her. Not only did you not need her, but in your silence you've become something she can no longer affect. You are no longer reactive, no longer reachable, no longer waiting. But here's what separates you now. You don't care whether she regrets it. You're not sitting there hoping she comes back. You're not craving recognition. You've spent the time building something more powerful than her attention. You've built peace. Real, unshakable peace. The kind that no one else controls. The kind that doesn't need closure because it created its own. And she feels that. She sees you living with purpose, moving with intention, smiling without needing to be seen. And that's when regret sets in, not because of what she did, but because of what she lost. You no longer need anything from her, not because you punished her. You've become the man she hoped you'd be, but no longer for her. Now, it's for you. From a Stoic lens, this is the final test of mastery. Indifference rooted in fulfillment, not bitterness. You don't ignore her to prove a point. You ignore her because your life has outgrown the version of you that needed her. You've elevated. And she, for the first time, can't come with you. Her loss isn't your victory. Your evolution is. Now, speak out and comment below. She didn't lose me when she left. She lost me when I grew beyond her. Number 8. The return that isn't about her anymore. She might come back. It may be subtle, a reaction to your story, a casual check-in, a carefully worded message that reads like nothing more than, "Hey, how have you been?" But you'll know what it really means. She's circling, testing, hoping to find the version of you that once needed her, the man who once would have dropped everything at the slightest hint of interest. But that man no longer exists, and this return, it's not about her anymore. You've changed, not for her, and not because you wanted her to regret it, but because you had to evolve to survive. You were broken, lost, disoriented, but instead of staying there, you chose discipline. You chose silence. You chose solitude. And in that space, you found your power. You restructured your identity without her in it, and now you're not the man trying to be chosen, you are the man choosing. So when she returns, something in you feels different. Not bitter, not angry, just unmoved. You don't feel the need to prove anything. You don't want to reply excitedly or ask where she's been, because your growth has outpaced her relevance. You're no longer running on the hope of reconnection. You're running on purpose. And that's the beauty of it. She doesn't know this version of you. She expected a reaction, a spark, a reminder of the past, but she finds indifference. Not fake, not forced, but genuine. Because by now you've seen what happens when your worth depends on her validation, and you've sworn never to return to that place again. The Stoics would call this self-governance. The highest form of discipline is not denying your emotions but mastering your responses. You don't lash out. You don't fall back. You simply acknowledge what's happening and keep moving. She is no longer a goal. She's a footnote in a chapter that shaped you, but no longer defines you. This isn't about revenge, it's about revelation. She's no longer someone you're trying to impress. She's someone watching from the outside, realizing the door she walked through is no longer open. And even if she wants back in, the man you are now no longer waits, no longer hopes, and no longer entertains anyone who treated him like an option. You've returned to yourself, and she returns to the realization that the man she left has become the man she can't touch anymore. Now, speak out and comment below. I returned for myself, not for her. Number 9. The final evolution. You'll never be that man again. There was a version of you that begged and that apologized for things that weren't your fault. They stayed up all night dissecting every word she said, that checked your phone, hoping, maybe even praying for her to reach out. That version of you wasn't weak. He was just lost. He hadn't yet learned that chasing approval is the fastest way to lose yourself. He hadn't yet learned that peace is an internal victory, not something handed to you by someone else. But now, that version of you is gone, and he's never coming back. This is the part of the journey where everything changes, not because you've proven anything to her, but because you've proven everything to yourself. You've endured the storm, you've walked through the fire, and you didn't just survive, you transformed. You no longer crave her response. You no longer check her updates. You don't fantasize about a reunion or rehearse what you'd say if she ever returned. Why? Because you've arrived at a place of total emotional independence. And this isn't just a phase, it's a new standard. The man you are now doesn't fold under pressure, he doesn't tolerate disrespect, he doesn't explain his worth to anyone. He doesn't need to prove that he's grown, he lives it. His presence, energy, and silence communicate something deeper than any words ever could. I know who I am now, and I don't need you to remind me. Stoicism teaches that external events, loss, rejection, betrayal, are not what harm us. Our judgment of them, our attachment to them, and our inability to accept them cause suffering. But you've stopped resisting reality. You've accepted that she left, and instead of clinging to a past that no longer serves you, you built a future that does. The most powerful moment in your evolution isn't when she notices. It's when you realize that her noticing no longer matters, when you stop flinching at her name, when you stop reminiscing about what was, when you stop measuring your progress by whether or not she regrets losing you. That's when you've truly won, not over her, but over the weaker self you used to be. And the final lesson? You've made peace with the past, not because it was perfect, but because it shaped you. You're no longer bitter. You're no longer heartbroken. You're just done. And from this point forward, you'll never chase someone again. You'll never beg for love again. You'll never shrink yourself again. Because now you know the truth. Your validation doesn't live in anyone else's hands. Now, speak out and comment below. I'll never be that man again, because I've met the man I was meant to become. Number 10, you've become unbreakable, and that's the real win. This journey didn't start with confidence, it started with collapse, with pain, feeling abandoned, rejected, and unsure of who you were without her. You didn't set out to become unbreakable, you simply had no other choice. And so, step by step, you built yourself back. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with discipline, with silence, with a growing sense of purpose that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with who you knew you could become. You stopped reaching out, you stopped reacting, you stopped hoping she'd return to fix the hole she left behind. Slowly, that hole began to close, not because she returned, but because you started filling it with things that mattered. Your strength, your focus, your mission. The version of you who once waited by the phone has been replaced by a man who wakes up with direction, with fire, with clarity. She may still cross your mind, that's human, but the difference now is that she no longer holds space in your future. She's no longer the goal, she's no longer the finish line. Because along the way you realized that the real win was never getting her back, it was getting yourself back. And more than that, it was meeting the man who can't be moved, manipulated, or made small again. This is what it means to be unbreakable. Not to never feel pain, but to no longer be controlled by it. Not to never love again, but to never love someone more than you love your own peace. Not to be cold, but to be centered, steady, grounded in your own worth. And when she finally realizes that the man she once broke is the man she can no longer reach, it will hit her harder than any silence ever could. But by then, it won't be about her anymore. Her regret will be real, but irrelevant, because you're too far gone, too far grown, too deeply in love with the life you created ever to go back. And that's not arrogance, it's self-respect. The kind that can't be faked, forced, or rushed. The kind that only comes from going through the fire and coming out forged. She thought she had left you behind, but in reality, you were only getting started. Now, speak out and comment below. I'm unbreakable, not because I never broke, but because I rebuilt without apology. You started thinking you'd lost everything, but now you see it wasn't the end but the beginning of your transformation. Instead, the pain she hoped would break you has freed you to become someone unstoppable. Your power was never hers to take, it was always yours. She just revealed where you'd left it behind. If you're ready to keep evolving and embracing the stronger version of yourself, like this video, subscribe and comment below. I am unstoppable. Stay strong, keep building. Your future isn't waiting, it's already being created.